Hey, the first set deleted the volume, deleted it deleted everything.
Pretty much. So the first 15, 20 minutes of it, you're not going to see it. We had to take it off. And we had a big problem because our computer decided to try to update and like shut things down and got stuck. So you'll see the second half was left on there, but the first half wasn't. So we decided to kind of do that real quick. And so we just brought our ladies in because normally we have like a live tea with me afterwards. So
I don't want them to miss
the first part
beginning.
because you're going to get into the middle and be like, okay, what are you talking about? We were all over the place, first of all, but there was a purpose of it. And if you missed the first part, which you did, you're not going to know what the second part was really about.
Well, good morning.
Good morning.
This is a little different, just so you know that. For everything, there is a season.
Mm-hmm.
Ecclesiastes.
Yeah, because it doesn't have icks on it. To everything there is a season and a time for every matter or purpose under heaven. A time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, a time to pluck up what is planted. A time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up. I wanted to talk about the time to heal, and this is kind of where we started, was a time to heal. We were talking about the seasons of our life, and we wanted to start from the first part of the season of our life is our birth.
Well,
and
for the women that are here, and there's a few that aren't, we discussed a little bit about the trauma of being born. First of all, growing up in the 1950s, you may have had, I think you ladies probably did, a mother that had multiple births, and sometimes 1 year apart from each other. And
my husband and his brother were 1 year apart. Just almost exactly 1 year apart. Actually, they were like 5 days difference, and from 1 year apart. And they were raised like they were twins, but they weren't.
Now,
which like traumatized them both because they were like,
in 30 minutes, we will end this because the parts are going to be switched off. Mm-hmm. But for those of you that didn't hear this little part, we wanted to record it. I grew up in a generation where there wasn't any birth control. At least I don't think there was. And you just had babies as they came. And you may have had multiple in a row. Every year, it was common to be pregnant again and again and again and again. And parenting was left up a lot of times to the older kid, which wasn't always smart. And we discussed later in this what it was like to just be sent out to play without supervision, or and how some parents reacted. So in growing up, your birth, if you begin with your birth, and this is where we began this morning, is the seasons in our life. From birth to 10 years old, there's a season. And you can be traumatized actually from your birth, depending on who speaks into your life.
Well, and as parents, we don't mean to. Sometimes we speak things like, let's say we had a really hard childbirth with this kid. We have a tendency to talk about it, especially as moms. We talk with other women about our birth experiences, and this kid can get a complex that they caused you this pain. I mean, and I've heard stories. I have a nephew that was very large at birth, and because of the way everybody always talked about it, it affected him as an adult. It affected him as a teenager. His mother was hurt and so severely gone through so much from his birth, and it's like, wow, and we know, okay, so we know factually he had nothing to do with it, but that doesn't matter. It can really affect the soul. It truly affects the soul of someone. And you can be affected in the womb, whether you were wanted or not. My husband's mom was told to abort him because of the AB incompatible blood that the other boys had had. And my husband was born dying, needing a blood transfusion, but she refused. And yet, so there was this thing that he knew he was wanted by his parents, but he talked about it in childhood. He talked about it. There was a song that she sang during John's accident. She was pregnant with Matt at the time of my handicapped brother-in-law. He was hit by a drunk driver at 6 years old. And it was during that time she was pregnant with Matt, and she used to sing, "I've got confidence. I've got confidence. My God is going to see me through." And so when Matt was like 5, 6 years old, he's running around the house and he's singing the song, all the verses, all the words. And she was like, "How do you know that song?" She hadn't sung it since he was born, because John was home from the hospital and doing well and healing and everything. And she hadn't sung that song. And she said, "How do you know the song?" He says, "I don't know. I just know all the words." So there's, even in the womb, your children hear things. Mm-hmm. And so the stuff, if you had a traumatic experience during your pregnancy, often the baby is affected by it somehow. So, and Matt's the closest to his brother. That's the other thing we've talked about. Out of all the brothers, he is always, like, he knew when John was having a seizure. He has a connection with John. He was in the womb when John had his accident. So there's a connection there that was different than everybody's.
I also think a lot of women, when we came from a generation of, I call it multiple births. Mm-hmm. If you could get pregnant, you were pregnant. And you had many children, boom, 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 in a row. And there were times that moms didn't want to be pregnant. They had just given birth, and they did not want the responsibility of another child underfoot. They hadn't had time to even breathe yet.
Yeah.
In ancient days, many times they would have female nannies, or you could call them slaves, but there were women that assisted other women. Sometimes they were brought in from other countries, or there would be a concubine. They were brought in to serve the woman and also the man. There were multiple children being born all the time. My family had 5, and a couple were miscarried. But there was a lot of pregnancy, I think, in the early young days. It was common to say we liked our women barefoot and pregnant. Personally, as a bad comment, because I want to say women never got a break.
Well, you also grew up in an era where everybody wanted a son. They wanted a son to pass on the name. They wanted a son to take on the father's business, or a son to work along the father, especially for farmers and stuff. Daughters were an inconvenience a lot of times. They helped mom, but daughters meant you had to have a dowry for marriage, and they were an inconvenience in a lot of ways.
I think they weren't.
There was this attitude.
Physically as strong.
Yeah.
And so they were required to do the housework. But there was an era, and let me mention this, and I think in the second half, which is debuting first, you were required to do chores every day. That's just how the family functioned.
Yeah.
And you should be as strong as your brothers. And you should be working right alongside the rest of the family. Mm-hmm. And so some families never, they did not use the difference between male and female and understand.
And sometimes
your sister is not as strong as you.
Yeah. Sometimes the females were really raised pretty much like tomboys, and a lot of that. And so the female part of them was kind of stumped. The more femininity was kind of stumped in some of them. So, and we saw a lot. I saw a lot of that, and even as a foster parent. And we saw a lot of, when I was a foster parent, I saw a lot of girls come in my home, and the oldest girl was the mom.
Mhm.
She was the mom of the younger siblings. She was used to raising the siblings. So coming into foster care and having an adult actually take that role on was very difficult. I remember sitting with one of my daughters and saying, let me be the mom. You don't have to do this. Hand it off to me. Let me do it. It's my job now. It's not yours. You get to simply be the kid. You know what she said to me? I don't know how. Those were, I mean, it was just.
You were made to
The
grow up pretty
trauma.
fast and made to mature.
Mhm.
And there's nothing wrong with raising our children to be mature.
Mature,
But when
yeah.
you're never held
Mhm.
because the next baby has come along, we learned our lessons. I wanted
Mhm.
some space between my kids.
Well, we kind of saw this with our puppies, because Ziggy was the last one, and he was born in the grass, and it was traumatic. And so my dog didn't actually attach to him. So here I have this puppy that is this big in my hand, literally fits this way. I scooped him up. He was a wet mouse. That's what he looked like. He looked like a wet mouse. And brought him inside, laid him before my dog, and my dog didn't attach to him. Didn't lick him, she had already had an hour with the first puppy, and she had already had a whole nother hour with the other three, nursing and licking them, and they were responding and moving and all of that. This baby is laying there totally wet and limp, and she don't care. There was no connection. So I had to take the other puppies away from her and force her to connect with them. I don't think he would have lived had we not been so aggressive in what we did. And then it took a couple days, and we had to help feed him and all that. And he's finally growing, and he's finally catching up with the other ones. But I watched him yesterday. One of the big ones barreled over and knocked him over, and he went, I'm going to take you back. And he pushed him over. And I was like,
Good for you.
good for you. He's finally growing. But we had to force the connection because it wasn't there. I think sometimes you had baby on baby and baby so much back to back.
I do
There are
think
people-
there were
there's babies
there were
that just
some
didn't get
generations
connected.
the boys held more honor.
Yeah.
And the girls, you're here, but
You cost the family to be a girl.
you're not as
Oh my-
valuable.
No.
You can't work as hard. You're not. And so I think what we speak, it's not just what we speak over our children. I believe it's the impression we give too.
If you watch Little House on the Prairie, you really see this. You really see it, because they're like, they really want a boy. And when they finally get a boy, he dies. He gets sick. He dies. The trauma literally makes Laura run away. And all this stuff happens. So if you've ever watched that series, you kind of really get, and the whole family, every time they had a boy in the family, the boy died. It was this horrible, like, what was that? I guess that is actually what happened to this family. And yet in an era where boys were so valuable.
It's still that way in China, though.
Yeah.
It's still that way where girls were lesser,
Mm-hmm.
not quite as valuable. And yet, okay, let's just go to the Wermuth boys. There's 4 of them, 5 of them, 5 of them, no girl.
Yeah.
And the girl is greatly desired. I wish I had one. I wish I had one. The last kid that comes along, there can be a disappointment, like, oh, geez, you're not a girl.
Yeah.
I was so hoping for a girl.
My niece,
You know, that kind of an
this is kind
attitude.
of the
Also,
the comedy in that is that my niece was born, Hannah. She was born, and she was the first girl in 40 years on the Warmuth side of the family. And
40 years.
my mother-in-law was so excited. So she bought her all these girly things. She wore all these girly stuff when she was little, and she became a tomboy. And everybody was like, oh my gosh, it's, what in the world? So when Marlena was born, Marlena was the second girl, which is my daughter. Marlena was the first granddaughter for you, the first great granddaughter for my grandfather in baby. We adopted 2 older girls, so they became older than my daughter, but she was the first born great granddaughter. And so Marlena had all this to live up to, and then she was the second. And everybody was like, a girly girl. And she became a tomboy.
In our family.
In
Now,
our family.
Amy-
And it was like, oh my goodness.
Now, Amy, when Amy was born, I carried Amy around. She was like a toy. In our family, all the children were cherished. But I do understand the era of many of the women that we minister to. They came from an era of multiple births, and they felt disregarded or not cherished, not heard, not believed, not protected. There was a whole generation of that. And so I read the scripture in 1 Chronicles 4, verses 9 and 10, and I read about Jabez, how when he was born, he was the most honorable of all of his brothers. But his mother had called him
Jabez.
sorrow maker.
Yeah.
Because he was born in pain. She had such a painful childbirth. She called him sorrow
Well, and the
maker.
same thing happened.
Why?
I know, but the same thing happened with Rebecca when she had Benjamin. She had Benjamin in her anguish, and then she actually died in childbirth just a little bit after. And she named him Benoni. When she died, Jacob changed Benoni's name to Benjamin because Benoni means son of my trouble, son of my pain. And he named him Benjamin, which means son of my right hand, son of blessing. And I was like,
Why would
wow.
you name your kid
Yeah.
a painful name? You know, it's kind of like Naomi named her 2 sons, Chilion and
I don't remember the other. Chilion and what
is it?
Mylon?
Mylon?
Yeah, I think it was Mylon and Chilion.
I'm telling you, one was named consumption, which was sickness and disease. And the other one was named like tuberculosis or dying. They meant, your name actually meant something.
When Enoch actually named Methuselah, because so Enoch was Methuselah's father. When he named him, what he named him is when you die, the floods will come. That's basically, or it will happen. And that's what his name meant. So the year that he died, the flood came.
I think we have to watch what we name our kids.
Yeah.
Even our grandchildren.
And watch
the names mean something.
And also watch what you call them. So when I was a kid, my uncles called me spastic.
I would correct them every time. She's such a spaz. She's spastic. I said, no, you're not labeling her this. You are not calling her this. I will not allow it. How about the name Klutz? He's such a klutz.
Mm.
He, she's so homely.
Mm.
She just looks like, like her grandmother. And you think, what's grandma look like? Oh, grandma was not good looking. I think when you refer to children, first of all, you can put them in bondage for the rest of their life by how you treat them, call them, and what you do. And so your first years, the most impressionable of your life, can be formed by an overcrowded family that disregards you, by names that you are called, by parents who ignore you, by people who allow your siblings to raise you, and parents that don't listen to you. And so our generation, there was a time in our generation that it was said 1 out of every 4 girls have been abused. I found out 3 out of every 4 have been abused. The statistics were much higher. I didn't even know what sexual abuse was, and yet many people grew up in it. That was a lifestyle in a home. And there was an ignorance and a silence that went with it. So how do you heal from a traumatic childhood? Is there a way? Is there a way to heal?
First of all, time doesn't heal. Well, I mean, we said this before, so it may be in the second one, but time doesn't heal all wounds. Time is not the healing agent here. And a lot of times people are like, oh, time will just heal it. No, because you could be 60 years old and something that happened to you at 5 or 6 still is gravely affecting you now, greatly affecting you.
Right.
And you're 60. Time does not heal. What heals is when we bring it to the Lord and he heals it. And I love what it says. There is a time to heal. It doesn't say time heals. There is a time to heal. It means you have to purposely make the time and set it aside to bring what is broken before the Lord in order for him to heal it. There's a time to heal. There's a time to separate from the wound and actually bring it to God and say, I'm going to sit here at your feet until you heal me because I'm done being broken. This happened so many years ago, but yet it hasn't healed. And the other part of that is when we come to Jesus Christ, we get adopted into a new family. Our job is to now adapt to that family, to that kingdom, and realize that what we were born in is not our true identity. And for some, and that is healing to me. Because those areas, yes, I grew up in a great family, but did we have our faults? And we talked a little bit about that in the second half, that there was things I learned. There's conversations I have with my children that you never had with your kids because we didn't know they were an issue, like pornography. And because of what my brothers went through and my husband went through and different people, we have now conversed those things with our children to try to help. So our children are raised with a better understanding.
And raised healthy with understanding in freedom.
In freedom.
So we are, this is like just a smidgen of the first half that got deleted by accident.
So we want to make sure we kind of caught you guys up. So you see the second half, you kind of know why we were talking about all that.
So catch the second half. Because this is going to be 8 weeks of seasons of the heart, seasons of life.